Hello and welcome to another episode of the Iraqi Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host Juma Iraqi, and today I'm very fortunate to be joined by Sohee Lee. Sohee, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Finishing up school, a little tired, but hanging in there. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. I know you've been really busy lately, so I really appreciate that you're taking the time to do this podcast with me today. Before we start, this podcast will be available on YouTube, but if you prefer to listen to it in your car, for example, you can find it on iTunes as well. So, Sohee, today's topic will be eating behavior, and I know this is a topic that you have a lot of knowledge about, but before we dive into the questions, could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, I can give you a shortened version of it. My name is Sohee Lee. I'm 27 years old. I am currently finishing up my master's program in psychology at Arizona State University. As you said, my area of interest is the psychology of eating behavior. I'm also interested in topics such as long-term weight loss maintenance, which I know we'll be talking about later on. I have my background in human biology. That was my undergrad degree from Stanford. I've worked at a number of different training facilities, and I also run an online business. Currently, my business is fully online, where I have online clients. I've got some ebooks. I've got some host a podcast of my own. I've got a book out on Amazon and bookstores, and I basically am fully immersed in the fitness industry. I have an eating disorder background, as with many people. I've had a history of anorexia and bulimia for many years, and that was how my interest in fitness got started, because I did not know anything about nutrition, anything about proper exercise. I was the cardio queen. I was doing 3-4 hours of cardio a day. Did not know what a protein, carb, and fat was, and really spent a lot of years very confused and very frustrated. And I picked up a fitness magazine. I think it was Oxygen magazine, at the grocery store in early 2008, January of 2008, which was my last year of high school. And that's when I fell in love with the athletic, lean look on, that a female could sport. I did not realize that as a woman you could look that way without being a professional athlete. And so that's when I first started learning about, actually, I dove into the clean eating world first, in heavy quotations. I learned about protein, carbs, and fats. And obviously with that comes like this food is good for you, this food is bad for you, and whatnot. So kind of went from one eating disorder to another. So I went from bulimia to orthorexia for a while, and then eventually found my way back to what I practice now, which is more of a flexible dieting, intuitive eating approach. So I've kind of macros before. I've competed in bikini competitions. I've done powerlifting meets. I have a lot of personal experience dabbling in different endeavors in the fitness world. And now I've kind of settled with a very, very moderate approach. And I'm really big on dietary adherence. I'm really big on enjoying what you're doing. I'm really big on quality of life. These are things that I didn't really think of before years ago. And so now with my clients, I really try to make an effort to get them to prioritize the same things and get them to not just think of the next 12 weeks where they want to be with their fat loss or their body comp goals, but also think about 1 year from now, 2 years from now. And that can be really, really hard to get them to think more long term. So that's something I always try to do. People who follow me on any of my social media channels, I love when I get this feedback. When they think about dietary adherence, when they think about moderate approach, they think of me. Mm-hmm. I'm one of the first people who comes to mind, because I'm always talking about those topics in about 1,000 different ways, and I will continue doing it for years and years to come. But anyway, going back to school right now, so I'm finishing up my master's degree. I'll be graduating in May, hopefully, of 2018. And my goal with that was to learn how to read research, learn how to understand and conduct statistical analyses on my own, because I kind of knew that I would never teach myself those things. I had to be in a class being graded with a professor teaching me these things. And so I would like to eventually start publishing research of my own instead of just citing other people's research when I do presentations and whatnot. So that's the direction I want to head in, and obviously keep coaching and keeping a voice in the industry.
Sounds good. Do you have any plans for further education? Are you considering doing a PhD?
Yeah. You know, I've had a few colleagues tell me that I kind of have to do it next. It's just kind of the next step for me. Mm-hmm. Right now, I am really missing working full-time on my business. I'm accomplishing exactly what I came to do in this master's program. Fortunately, it's just a 2-year program, so it's not too long. And I'm well over halfway done. Right now, I just want to get back to working, create some ebooks, maybe some digital courses, get back to doing more speaking engagements, traveling a little bit more to do that, and spending more time actually doing research. If and when I ever meet an advisor or a professor who ends up being a really good match for me in terms of research area of interest, and also obviously your personalities and everything you have to get along in that regard, especially with a PhD program, I would be open-minded to doing that, maybe in a few years. But right now, I'm pretty ready to take what I can from school for the time being and apply it to my career and apply it to the real world. So not yet.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good plan. I think a lot of people maybe rush into it, but doing a PhD, you really have to think things through. And like you said, you really need to find a topic and a supervisor that you connect really well with.
Absolutely makes a huge difference. And honestly, I'm still kind of figuring out what my, with research, you have to be, especially with PhD, obviously you're getting to a really, really, really nitty gritty, very specific topic. And I don't really know what that is yet. I have a general idea of what area I want to be in, but to narrow down, I would like more time to sift through the literature and become more familiar with what research is already out there.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, so let's dive into the questions. Like, you've worked with a lot of clients, so what are the biggest mistakes you see people make when they're trying to lose weight?
From a client standpoint?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The biggest thing is, so I know that nowadays the fitness industry is very saturated with anyone can become an online coach. Anyone can do one bodybuilding competition and now all of a sudden they're a coach. Or maybe they don't even compete at all. They just decide that that's what they want to do because the idea of working from home and making quote unquote easy money appeals to them. With that in mind, one thing I see happening is when clients try to fight the coach on what the best approach is for them, especially for me in particular, because I don't do extreme approaches with my clients. I don't cut calories very low. I don't give them tons of cardio. I always think of their quality of life and how this is going to affect how they feel physically, mentally, all those things. When they try to fight me and say, this is not extreme enough, I need to be doing this much cardio, I need to be dropping my calories to this intake daily, I need to be dropping this much weight per week, I need to be ready by this date, which is far too short for them. I have a hard time with that. So generally, not being patient enough with the process, not understanding that it's not the rate of progress they make that's important, not nearly as important as, can I actually keep this up over the long term? Is this a sustainable behavior change that I can maintain? Maybe if I work on tackling 1 or 2 moderate-sized behavior changes, that's very doable for me. But if you, I remember I was trying to explain this to a colleague, actually to my advisor last year. I was using, delta. Delta is, change. Mm-hmm. If your delta for behavior change is too big, you're not going to be able to keep it up. And especially if you have multiple behavior changes that you're tackling at once. So the goal in my case is to minimize delta and allow you to still see progress. That way, you don't feel so deprived. It doesn't feel so hard. You don't have to rely on motivation to to execute that behavior, because right now, at the beginning of your fitness journey, you're feeling very highly motivated. This is as high as your motivation was going to be because you haven't done anything yet. You're in a well-rested state. You're well-fed. You're not stressed out. You're feeling like, yes, I can absolutely do this. I can go super gung-ho. And in psychology, this is called the hot-cold empathy gap, where it's the inability to empathize with how difficult a situation is going to be later on. So even things like late at night when you set your alarm for, let's say, 6 a.m. the next morning, you're like, oh yeah, I'll get up, no problem. But when 6 a.m. actually rolls around and your alarm goes off, you feel absolutely horrible. And you're thinking, what was I thinking? That was the worst idea. That's an example of the hot-cold empathy gap in place, not being able to empathize with how difficult it's going to be when it actually happens. Same thing happens with diets and fitness journeys all the time. New Year's resolutioners, yes, 12 weeks, I'm going to eat these 6 items on my food list and go to the gym 6 days a week and be sad, and I'm just going to do it. And then 2 weeks in, they've already quit. That's hot-cold empathy gap in practice. So they fail to fully appreciate changes in motivation, changes in their psychological state, in their physical state, fail to consider where they want to be long term. So that is by far and above the biggest mistake that I see people making, and this is what gets them into trouble time and time again. This has a lot to do with why we have trouble with long-term weight loss maintenance, for example, why we have so many incidences of yo-yo dieting. That plays a huge, huge part in it.
Excellent. Now, working with a lot of clients, have you also noticed other things that they might do like, for example, I've worked with a lot of clients, and what I see with a lot of them is that usually it's not an issue with following what they should do in regards to exercise and nutrition on weekdays. But then when the weekend comes, yes, suddenly it's really hard to stick to what you're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. So what do I do with that? What's my approach with that?
Yeah, what are some of the strategies that you can do to work around that, for example?
Okay. So actually, a few months ago, I wrote a blog post. I think it was back in April. I wrote a blog post on this very topic, especially with diet, obviously with exercise too. I see that. However, it tends to not be as big of a problem. Usually, people don't really struggle as much with getting in their workouts. That to a lot of people, tends to be, quote unquote, the easy part of fitness. Mm-hmm. They enjoy it. They look forward to it. It's 1 hour out of your day. Doesn't matter what you do in the other 23 hours. Whereas with diet, you kind of have to be on all the time. And everything you eat, no matter who's watching, no matter what time of day, it all counts, right? Unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So definitely see a huge trend with this. I started noticing it several years ago, where people are really good at staying on point with their diets during the week. And then during the weekends, as they unwind from work, as they have more social engagements, they kind of let their diets fly out the window. And it's very much an all or nothing mentality. Well, I'm 100% on during the week, and then on the weekend, I'm just off. Everything is fair game. I will eat everything that's in sight. And I think a lot of it comes from their own mindset that maybe it's a self-imposed restriction where during the week they don't allow themselves to indulge, or they intentionally keep their calories pretty low. And then during the weekend, they're like, well, this is my 1 48-hour window of opportunity to eat everything that I can't eat during the week. So that mindset can actually compound the irresponsible eating behavior over the weekend. We call it last chance syndrome. It's a slang, not obviously not a formal term, but they think, this is my last chance to eat this before my window opportunity closes. Mm-hmm. I'm going to eat everything I can, even if I don't really like it. I'm just going to eat it because I can, because it's here, until I'm sick, and I want to keep going. So I noticed, if you have, maybe they eat like 1,200 calories during the week and then 3,000 calories over the weekend. There's quite a discrepancy. So I wrote a blog post on this back in April of this year called The Weekday Diet. And I had been using this approach a little bit with my clients. I just hadn't thought of a name for it. But I love this name because it really embodies what it feels like. It feels like you're just dieting during the weekday. However, instead of having, 12,000 calories during the week, 3,000 calories over the weekend, and in fact, I would even argue that many people, even women, are able to get the calorie intake up to 4, 5, even 6,000 calories per day on the weekend if they want to. Have been women who have gotten that. And anyone who's lived this lifestyle before, you're well aware that one or two, even one day of overeating like that can very easily undo all your weeks of worth of hard work. If your goal is fat loss, any calorie deficit you've worked to create can be eliminated within one day of very high irresponsible eating. So obviously, this is not ideal. You don't want to make progress during the week and then backtrack over the weekend and then just go back and forth and not make any net progress over time. So what I do now instead is a lot of clients are doing this right now. I give them weekday macros or a weekday set calorie intake, and then weekend macros. And what I do is their weekday macros, they are lower than their weekend macros, but the discrepancy between weekday and weekend numbers are far lower than what they would do, which is crash dieting and just an extreme approach. So I bring that level down a lot more, where let's say maybe on the weekend they have, instead of 2,500 calories more on the weekend, they have maybe 500 calories more per day. So giving them that kind of structure, but still setting limits on their intake allows them to still feel like they're getting a break from dieting. It's great mentally, psychologically. It gives them something to look forward to. It motivates them to continue to adhere to the diet during the week. And then during the week they're like, oh God, I have this many more calories to allot to, maybe I can fit in an alcoholic drink. Maybe I can have some pasta this weekend or whatever it is and fit it into their intake. And but without spiraling out of control. So by the time Monday rolls around, they're still making forward. They've still got forward momentum going. So this is my way of instead of one of the biggest pet peeves I have with coaches and fitness professionals and personal trainers in general is when you have a client who complains about something or saying I really struggle with this one thing. A lot of times telling them, don't do that. That's not helpful. Mm-hmm. Saying things like, well, maybe if you just tried harder, or stop doing that. That does not help anyone. So my thinking always, instead of stop eating so much on the weekend, I'm thinking, okay, how can I give them what they want, where what they want is the psychological feeling of I'm relaxing on the weekend, but without undoing all their progress. Okay, I'm going to compromise with you. Let's meet halfway. You can't eat like that anymore, but you can kind of eat a little bit like that. Just gotta meet these just a few guidelines. Work with me a little bit. Actually I was listening to a podcast with Mike Israetel not long ago, and he was discussing how if you want to make any kind of body composition progress, physique progress, you need some kind of restriction on your diet. You have to, whether it's and a lot of popular diets, as you know, they create calorie deficits by eliminating entire food groups or having a good food list and a banned food list that you're not allowed to eat. Those are all different ways, or even like restricting your feeding window, for example, with intermittent fasting. These are all different ways of reducing your calorie intake, of restricting your intake. And there's no way around it. You have to have a calorie deficit. You have to have your calorie intake at an appropriate level for you, for your goal. The goal is, I think, which I kind of wish more coaches would think this way, the goal with this for long-term behavior change is to get you as the client to impose the restriction without actually feeling like it's a restriction. So minimize psychological feelings of dietary restriction. And that's going to look different for everyone. So not everyone would do well on the weekday diet that I just discussed. Some would, some won't. Some people have no problem eating the same during the weekend as they do during the week. With them, I would use a different approach. So being able to tailor the strategy to the individual that allows for the appropriate restriction to take place without them feeling like it's too much of a sacrifice for them, for their lifestyle, for things like that. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think like one of the things that I often ask clients that come to me and ask me about a crash diet, for example, uh, I always ask them, is the like if you're gonna maintain your results, you need to maintain the new habits that you
Yeah.
did to reach that goal. So would you be able to follow this diet day in and day out for the rest of the life? And all of them always say, no, I'm just going to do it for a period. But what are you going to do after that? So,
Yes.
so my question is, why do you think a lot of people are drawn a lot to these like strict, rigid diet approaches compared to being more moderate and flexible with their approach? Do you think that they don't believe that they can get result and still eat some of the foods that they enjoy in
Yeah.
moderation?
I think that's a huge part of it, and I think some of it also stems from this learned fear we have. A lot of people have been taught that all their life that sugar is bad, junk food is fattening, dietary fat is fattening, this and that, and so they think that if that's the case, then I can't eat any of it. Might as well not eat any of it. And I think also there's a little bit of heroics going on where you want to be a hero, you want to be impressive, you want to tell people about your diet and they go, wow, you are so extreme, you are so hardcore. And obviously that can be a point of pride, like, oh yeah, it's so tough, but look at me, I'm so great because I can stick to this for like 3 weeks. But
Yeah.
regardless, so it's just, and it's just, I decided that I want to see these changes now. I want to see these changes yesterday. I'm not going to wait. I don't want to wait 4 months, 5 months for these changes to take place. I want to wait. I only want to wait 1 month. I don't want to wait. I want to have it happen in 2 months, and then I can get back to living my life, even though it doesn't work that way. And it's gosh, I remember a few years ago, I had a client start with me. Within 2 weeks, she had lost, I think, 4 pounds off the scale, so almost 2 kilos. And she had lost 2 inches off her waist, which is what is that, like 5 centimeters, 6 centimeters,
Yeah,
in two
fine.
weeks.
Hmm.
That's fast progress.
Hmm.
Working with me in 2 weeks on a moderate calorie deficit, only lifting weights 4 days a week, and she goes, yeah, this isn't fast enough. I'm done. She quit.
Hmm.
And I'm sitting here like, oh my God, this is amazing. Actually, this is exactly what people want. What you want is to not feel like you're trying that hard and still making good progress. And for her, that momentum, she had really good momentum going, but she was so impatient that to her, it still was not good enough. She was expecting, 8 pound, 4 kilo loss in 2 weeks. That's what she was expecting, without realizing, okay, if I just keep this up for 3-4 months, I can make some pretty incredible progress. But she's not thinking that way. She's thinking, okay, what's the fastest amount of progress I can see over time? So unfortunate, such a wasted opportunity. And hopefully, I don't know what she's doing, but hopefully she's learned better by now. Maybe a lot of times people have to learn through personal experience, through making the mistakes on their own enough times where they get frustrated to the point where they're like, oh, it's obviously not working. They got to try something else. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And I remember I read a post maybe 1 or 2 years ago on my Facebook being like, okay, let's say you're overweight, you're obese, you want to lose the weight, but everyone's in a rush. What's the rush? What's the rush? And one person goes, it really sucks being fat. That was the reason, And I'm like, huh, okay. And I had never, obviously, I've never been overweight before. I've never been obese before. So as much as I can try to understand or read literature or everything, I don't have that I've never been personally in that position before. So when you say it sucks being fat, I can respect that. I can respect that reason. You're uncomfortable. Maybe your quality of life is, not that great, things like that. So I can understand the desire to want to get to a place where you can, you feel more comfortable in your clothing, or move around, go up the stairs without feeling winded, things like that. I can understand your desire to get there. So I think that has a lot to do with it, is being uncomfortable with where you are now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you look at, especially when you look at obese people, this change with their body composition, it hasn't really happened overnight. So it's sometimes difficult to try to explain to them that it took some time to actually
Years.
gain all this weight. So it's probably going to take a while to get it all off.
Yes,
But and
absolutely.
yeah, but like losing the weight doesn't seem to be the issue. A lot of people can lose the weight. It's the keeping off that seems to be the problem.
Yeah.
And statistics shows that like when people lose weight, the next 5 years, 95% of them gain all the weight back.
Yes.
And what are the 5% actually doing? And a lot, if you look at the research, a lot of them seems to have a more flexible approach to both nutrition and diet.
Absolutely, yes. So that the flexible approach plays a lot into what's called dichotomous thinking toward food. And dichotomous thinking is when you see things as black and white, all or nothing. Toward food, it's when, oh, these foods are good, these foods are bad. And what dichotomous thinking does is it especially with junk food, and sometimes for some people it might be like refined carbs, like bread, for example, is considered bad for their diet and things like that. But what happens is that it sets off this strict boundary where if you're behind this line, you're good. But as soon as you cross this line, you've committed some dietary transgression, which then induces feelings of guilt. And because your thinking is so black and white, it's your on plan, your off plan. When you cross that line in your mind, now you're off plan. So you might as well just binge your face off and eat everything you want. And this is the literature. This is very much in line with my master's thesis currently, actually. I'm looking more into dichotomous thinking toward food. And it is absolutely associated with higher rates of weight regain, and I believe higher BMI overall also, because they're not able to, colloquially we call it the what the hell effect, where you eat you eat one piece of chocolate. Now your diet is ruined. Oh, what the hell? I might as well eat everything now because the whole day is gone. Mm-hmm. That's what the hell thinking. It's in the literature it's called counter-regulatory eating. And it's this black and white thinking versus a more graduated approach. And the research also shows that a more flexible dietary approach versus rigid, this is where we got the term flexible dieting, flexible dietary restraint, is associated with lower rates of weight regain and better eating behaviors overall. So that definitely has a ton to do with it, is the dichotomous thinking toward food. And a lot of it, too, I think, has a lot to do with not understanding from the beginning, not understanding what it's going to take to maintain the results, or the importance even of maintaining the results. Because a lot of people don't even think beyond the end of their diet, the 12-week diet, the 8-week diet. Okay, what about the day after? I don't know. Just go back to, you can't go back to living your previous lifestyle because you're going to gain everything back. You cannot do that. And for a lot of people, they're like, what? I don't understand. So they think they can just do a temporary diet and then revert back to how they were and maintain the results. And I think setting expectations up very clear up front, saying, okay, this is going to be a lifestyle, as cheesy as it sounds. This requires a lifestyle change. You have to start eating differently forever. You have to start exercising more regularly. And, the research does show that those who are more successful at long-term weight loss maintenance, they're able to, they keep their diets in check overall. They monitor their calories. They have high rates of self-monitoring. So usually they're referring to, they weigh themselves on a frequent basis, which, just to make sure that they're on the right track. And they exercise regularly. Basically, in general, just engage in good health behaviors all the time. That's pretty much what they have in common. Versus those who don't are the opposite. They are not responsible for their diets. They quit exercising, all these things like that. So on paper, it seems really, really straightforward. Well, obviously, okay, just keep up what you're doing. But the application of that, we found, has been a lot harder. With actually a lot of researchers now believe that dieting does not work. I disagree with that. I think it has a lot to do with, yes, many diets approaches have not been shown to be effective long term, but I believe that has more to do with not finding the right approach for the individual, so much as, diets in general just don't work. So that's my thinking. I'm very big on tailoring the approach to the person, rather than, here's a diet, you figure out a way to stick to it.
Yeah, and I totally agree with it, and especially the approach that you talked about, that if people are able to follow the diets on the weekdays but not on the weekends, why not find or tailor a system that, okay, on the weekends when there's a bigger chance that you're going to overeat, let's give you more calories on the weekend and subtract that from the weekdays. And talking about the black and white approach, I often tell my students when we talk about this that, because the way I look at it is, if you were to drive your car into a parking lot and get a scratch on your car, would you continue just wrecking your car? Because it's gonna need some maintenance work anyway, so I can so I can just wreck the car and send it away. But nobody does that. But when it comes to their diet, they do it. Like they for example on a Friday afternoon eat a small piece of cake, and they actually turn a small thing into a huge problem. Like what's a cake? Like it's an extra 300, 400, 500 calories that you can easily adjust for later in the day. Yeah, but it doesn't end up with 300, 400, 500 calories. It maybe ends up with 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 because you're doing it until Monday when you're starting all over again.
Yes. Very illogical. I like that analogy a lot. I've also heard the analogy where when you get a flat tire, do you then stab holes in your other 3 tires?
Yeah.
No. Right? So I think putting it that way, drawing that analogy, can really get people to be like, oh, yeah, that makes no sense. Of course I wouldn't do. Why am I doing this? And so even just bringing that up can get them to be like, oh, yeah, this makes no sense whatsoever. I can just rein it in. But it's still the mentality of you're on or you're off. Moving away from that still takes a lot of time. And one approach that I use, and I'm not saying this works for everyone, is to get people to overcome their fear of certain foods and move away from that black and white mindset, is to say, okay, every day I want you to work in 200 to 300 calories worth of junk food into your diet. I gave you a calorie target or a macro allotment. You're going to fit this into your macros. 200 to 300 calories, any junk food of your choosing, make it fit. It can be ice cream, chocolate, potato chips, whatever. I don't care. And having that permission is, sometimes it's like, oh, my coach is telling me to do this. But also the daily, I think it's a form of cognitive behavior therapy, I think, where, when you want to get over your fear of something, you gradually expose yourself to it a little bit over time. So I want to say, I may not correct fully, it's a form of that where you daily exposure to your fear helps you overcome that fear. And also it's learning that, oh, you know what, I have this calorie limit, I have this protein target, and I'm still fitting in this slice of cake into my diet every day, and I'm actually still making progress. So maybe this isn't a bad thing after all. And so that, living that, experiencing that can really help to change their mindset and get them to let go of that belief that some foods are inherently fattening and, obvious, et cetera. The myth that I'll never die with nutrition for body composition. Sugar is inherently fattening, junk food is inherently fattening, all those things. So I've been using that approach more and more with many of my clients, incorporate that into every day. And, obviously there are some people who prefer not to eat junk food every day. Maybe they like to save it for the weekend, or once a week or twice a week they have a special occasion or something, and that's obviously fine as well. The point is giving yourself permission to indulge in something guilt-free, and also still account for its nutritional, the calories, the protein, probably like the trace protein, and the carbs and fats into your diet, and you're more than fine. And then also, with that regard, I think, especially with social media, showing that you walk the walk yourself, showing examples of other people who are able to eat the occasional donut and be fine, things like that, can be really, really helpful.
I think that's a great strategy, because also if you give this allowance to the client and they fit it in their diet and they're like, okay, I'm still losing weight and I'm still eating ice cream. So maybe it's because sometimes what I find difficult with clients is trying to make them understand the balance between what you're consuming and what you're expending during the day. They're more focused on the foods. Yes. And one of the issues I had with females that are pretty like small females that want to lose a couple of extra pounds, when they come to you and they say, but I eat healthy, like I eat, I eat healthy, I eat salads and I eat this, but they're adding like an avocado for each salad, and they're not thinking about, okay, it's healthy to eat avocados, but it's adding too much calories to your diet, and that's why you're not losing. And making them more aware of these things is a good strategy. But if you were to give, like, let's say, for example, you have a new client that has zero knowledge about nutrition and training. If you were to give that client 3 advice to start off with, what would that be? Like 3 new habits that they should start working on.
3 new specific habits. Okay, so I recently launched a new service, and I do a nutrition consult service now for people. It's not a coaching service. It's a one-off. You fill out a questionnaire, tell me all about your eating behaviors, your struggles, etc., your goals, and I give you comprehensive feedback. It's been really eye-opening because it's telling me a lot about what people tend to struggle with, and a lot of what I see is not enough protein, haphazard meal eating, so every day looks totally different. There's no structure whatsoever to their meals. There's no they graze throughout the day, and and that's the other thing is the meals that they eat themselves are not balanced enough or not satiating enough, so they end up snacking all throughout the day. Which snacking by itself is obviously not unhealthy by any means, but the calories can add up very, very fast, especially when you're eating lots of tiny, tiny, tiny snacks that don't do anything to make you feel full. They just add a bunch of calories. So a lot of times it's just taking the time to make sure your actual meals themselves are nutritious, balanced, sufficient calories. If you can eat a meal in one sitting that'll help keep you full for the next 4 or 5 hours, that's far better than trying to eat as little as possible and having a 300 calorie meal, quote unquote, and then eating more and more and more snacks throughout the day. I think people don't realize how quickly those snacks can add up. Even like a bite here, a lick there, a taste there. It can add up to over 1,000 calories a day extra that you don't even realize that you're consuming. So, and then also making sure that try to have some protein in most meals, or ideally every meal, obviously. And I think, baseline for most people should be around 30 grams of protein, sometimes more for the person, depending on how many meals they want to eat per day, how big they are, their body weight, things like that, obviously. But just saying, okay, looking over your food log, your breakfast has no protein. Okay, let's throw in some protein, maybe a few eggs or whatever you want to eat. Have a protein shake with your breakfast or something. So find some ways to squeeze in extra protein every time you eat a meal. And obviously it does a lot for satiety, helping you keep you full, but also for body composition purposes also will help you, helps with body fat loss, helps with retention of lean body mass, just overall just better for body composition. So when I have a person who's a 60-kilo woman who's eating 30 grams of protein a day, there's a lot of room for improvement over there. There's a lot of room. So even just bumping up I think saying, go from 130 grams protein to 130 grams protein overnight, you're asking for too much change because protein is very filling. Usually they're not able to make such a drastic change. But if I say, let's add in 40 extra grams, maybe it's not ideally where I want them to be yet for body comp purposes, but it's still a lot better than what they were doing before. So I'm going to say, for the next month, have 70 grams. Then the month after that, we'll go up to 100 grams or something, a graduated approach. And then the meals is different from one individual to the next. But me, for example, I find I feel best when I have around 30 grams of protein, probably around 50 grams. I love my carbs, around 50 plus grams of carbs, and maybe around 20 grams of fats. If I don't have enough carbs, if I don't have enough fats, I don't feel right. I find myself reaching into the cupboard in between meals looking for snacks. I want to eat enough to where I can be satisfied, be sufficiently full, and then have to not think about food for the next 4 or 5 hours. So I can focus on work, focus on other areas of my life. I don't want to have to obsess over food all day long. So that's my approach. A lot of people will find that if they get in some veggies, some carbs, some starchy carbs, especially around their workout, obviously, some kind of healthy fat, whether it be olive oil, maybe some avocado, maybe not like a bunch of avocado, some nuts, some whatever, seeds, things like that. That can be enough to get them feeling really good at the end of the meal. And then the grazing, the snacking kind of takes care of itself when you improve upon the actual meals. And also, finally, just making sure that you eat. You don't have to eat at the same freaking minute every day, obviously, but at roughly the same times. The research shows that when you eat at roughly the same times every day, your body over time gets trained to release the hunger signals at around that same time every day. So that can do a lot, especially if you're whether you're intermittent fasting or eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Just having that structured is just good for overall lifestyle. I know it has some positive metabolic effects as well. So saying, okay, at a roughly this time, I'm going to eat this. Roughly this time, I'm going to eat, and roughly this time, I'm going to eat. You know what you're doing. You know what your meal should look like. You know to increase your protein. Even if you don't have them count calories right off the bat, which I think most people can get away with not doing for a long time. They can make tons of progress without ever using a food scale, without tracking in a single macro. Just making those few changes can make a huge difference in their physique, in their body composition, in their overall progress.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it also is important to think about what type of client you're having, what type of knowledge do they have about nutrition, because
Yes.
like nowadays, people say, should you follow macros or should you follow a meal plan? And I think it depends on what type of client that you have, because my opinion and my approach is more, if I have a client that doesn't know what a protein is, they're better off with having a meal plan with alternative to 2 to 3 meals during the day. And when they get more knowledge about nutrition, it's easier to transition them to following a more macro-based diet where they learn more. And eventually the end goal should be that it shouldn't be necessary that you weigh everything and that you track everything.
Yes.
That should be the end goal.
Yes, absolutely. I think tailoring the approach to the individual's knowledge level, their skill level also is super important. I don't expect, I have a lot of clients most of my clients track their macros, they weigh their food, but I understand also that it's not for everyone. So I actually turn away a lot of clients who I think I might not be a good fit for with the coaching behaviors that I prescribe and all those things. Meal plans, I think, are a great stepping stone, as you're describing. They're a great stepping stone. They're not a lasting strategy. They're a really great way of getting people to eat the right amounts of protein, carbs, fats, controlling for their calorie intake without having to do too much upfront work. But the expectation eventually is to graduate from that and move on to, okay, now you're going to, my friend Spencer Nadolski is really big on this, meal plan templates, where you're encouraged to swap out, okay, this protein, maybe I don't want today, but I'm going to swap it out for this. Instead of this carb, I'm going to have this carb. Instead of this vegetable, things like that. And the meal plan templates are really effective because you can practice them no matter where you are, no matter what restaurant you're at. You can pick a protein, you can pick a carb, you can pick a vegetable. It's very straightforward. You can pick a dietary fat. And then from there, obviously, I think macro tracking is really becomes especially important with people who are maybe preparing for a bodybuilding contest where you have to get really, really lean, or if you're already lean, trying to get even leaner, where the difference of maybe even 100 calories a day can make a difference between making progress versus stalling. And then, as you said, the long-term goal, very long-term, many people aren't quite ready for it yet, is eventually for maintenance purposes, for lifestyle purposes. Obviously, I don't expect you to weigh your food for the rest of your life. That's not practical. You're not going to bring a food scale everywhere you go. The goal eventually would be to get to a point where you are fully in tune with your hunger and satiety signals. This is intuitive eating, where you don't have to track calories, but you kind of auto-regulate. And this is actually kind of the opposite of macro tracking. Macro tracking is very dependent on the numbers you've been prescribed. I'm going to eat according to what macros I have left for the day. So this is relying on external cues. Relying on internal cues is a lot more difficult because, now you have to pay attention to, okay, how hungry am I? Am I actually hungry, or am I just bored? How much have I eaten? How satiated do I feel? All those things. And for example, people who have a history of bulimia would not be well suited for intuitive eating, at least not for a really long time. Mm-hmm. There are some people who believe that those with binge eating disorder, for example, will never ever be in tune fully with their hunger signals ever again. I think that it is possible. It just takes a really long time. So I think long term eventually, because obviously there are people all around the world in many different cultures who are able to practice intuitive eating just fine. And they're very healthy. They have healthy body weights. They live healthy lifestyles. And I think a lot of people have this fear that, oh, well, if I don't know exactly how much I'm eating every day, I might be eating too little. I might be eating too much. That's true, but you're also kind of adjust over time. If I undereat one day, I can feel it. The next day, I'll eat a little bit more to account for that, And then I also keep an eye on scale weight, on progress pictures, on how you look in the mirror, and then you can adjust your eating accordingly. It's more of a kind of trial and error approach, but I'm so much more flexible with my lifestyle now. I have a lot more what I call mental bandwidth to devote to school, for example, or to taking care of my clients instead of worrying about my diet and what I'm eating. So definitely long term, want to move to intuitive eating.
Sounds good. So to wrap up the podcast, what would be your take-home message on this topic?
Don't be afraid to start slow. Just because you're allowed to, you should absolutely expect to make mistakes with your diet. Don't view them as failures. They're really good. They're valuable learning opportunities. They're the best way to learn. Don't be afraid to try out different nutrition. I'm not saying program hop, don't do 1 week on this diet, 1 week on that diet, and just follow whatever fad, whatever flavor of the moment is popular. Instead, pay attention more to what eating frequency makes you feel your best. What foods do you enjoy? What's going to make you feel good? So I like to say that the diet you adhere to is going to be the diet that you actually enjoy. So you have to like the way you eat for long-term results. My strategy is, obviously it just changed over time. Currently, I employ intermittent fasting, intuitive eating approach. But I adhere to some basic guidelines. Try to get in a fistful of a palm-sized portion of protein at each meal. Tailor my carb intake according to my activity level for the day. If I have a real craving for something, I allow myself to indulge a little bit, and then I move on. Mm-hmm. That's my strategy. And never ever stress about what you eat. Never feel guilty about what you eat. If you overeat one day, pull it back a little bit the next day. Easy. Think more in shades of gray. I say get away from black and white and get comfortable in different shades of gray. So that's moderation. Celebrate every success. Focus more on successful behavior change rather than outcome. So you can control your behaviors. You can't control how the scale weight chooses to respond to your behaviors. So don't celebrate when you've lost 10 pounds per se. Maybe celebrate when you've mastered a certain eating behavior, when it feels effortless. And this is what I call effortless eating should be the ultimate goal. The goal should be to make your eating effortless to where you're still getting to where you want to be, but it doesn't feel like you have to bend over backwards to get there. And a lot of people really glamorize suffering and being hardcore, which is fine if it worked long term, but most of the time it's not a lasting strategy. So instead of thinking how hardcore can I be, think how can I make this work with my lifestyle? How can I do something that I can keep up not just a month from now, but a year from now, that, as you were saying. And the other thing too is so many people are so focused on figuring out the latest magic fat loss food, the latest dieting trick. They always look for these secret supplements, things like that. Okay, spend less time on figuring that stuff out and spend more time on mastering the basics of nutrition. I'm not going to give you supplements if you're getting 20 grams of protein a day. I'm going to get you to try to eat more protein a day first. Find ways to lower your total calorie intake, or maybe in your case you need to eat more calories or whatever. Just basic, even the most basic, simple eating habits, eating skills can take you a long way. In fact, I say that for most people, never using a food scale, never taking a single supplement, never using a food tracking app, in a lot of ways can take them 80 to 90% of the way to their goal. For most people, especially if you're overweight, especially obese, things like that, can get you most of the way there. So spend time mastering that first before worrying about anything else. So enjoy what you're doing, take a more moderate approach, focus on behavior change. That's what I would say.
Excellent. All right, Sohee, thank you so much for taking this time.
Absolutely.
This was great to finally get you on and talk about this topic. So where can people find more information about you?
Yep. So I'm very active on social media. You can find me. My brand name is Sohee Fit, SOHEEFIT. My Facebook page, my Twitter, my Instagram, they're all Sohee Fit. I do not have Snapchat. That's the one platform I won't get on. But I'm most active on Instagram. If you direct message me, I can't guarantee I'll get back to you because I get a lot per day now. I try to get back to some people. You can also use the contact form on my website to get in touch with me via email. I also, I offer coaching services. I offer different consult services, things like that. You can all check out at soheefit.com.
Excellent, Sohee. All right, Sohee, thank you so much again for the podcast, and hopefully we can do this another time on a different topic.
Absolutely. We'd love to do it again.
Okay. Thank you so much, and have a nice day.
Thanks.